Hello and welcome to News in Depth. My name is Anna Kalczyńska. Exactly 80 years ago in Nuremberg, the Nazi perpetrators pleaded not guilty in the International Military Tribunal. The historic Nuremberg trials, which once set the standards for prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity, now provide a framework for assessing Russia's accountability in the present war against Ukraine. With allegations ranging from targeted attacks on civilians to the crime of deportation of Ukrainian children, the principles forged at Nuremberg are being tested once again. Matthew Day, senior online editor at TVP World, joins me now to discuss the pursuit of accountability in Ukraine. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time.
As always, wonderful to be here.
So, as I understand, the purpose of the IMT, the International Military Tribunal, at that time was to punish the senior Nazi perpetrators, both military leaders and state leaders. That tribunal was established by Allied powers. There was no disagreement, right? Everyone wanted to pursue justice. And the trials were, should we say, exemplary, right? With the defendants able to have their legal representation. They all, as we just mentioned, pleaded not guilty, which could be outrageous to many victims and families of the victims at that time. But the justice was served, right? So, what exactly was the modus operandi? How it was being trialed? I mean, case by case, individually?
Actually, if we go back in time as well, apparently there was a bit of disagreement between the Allies about how justice should be served. Like, for example, I believe the Soviets preferred like a kind of Stalinist show trial, and so the people were guilty from the very beginning, and that would help them in like claiming reparations for the damage inflicted upon the Soviet state by the Nazi invasion. But the other allies, particularly the United States, they wanted a proper, shall we say, fair trial in which the defendants had the right to a defense counsel. They could plead their case in court, and that would demonstrate the, shall we say, the superiority of the Western system, and also help denazify Germany as well, which was actually a very important priority at the time, 1945. So there was this bit of disagreement, but eventually they settled on the Nuremberg framework, on the way that the trials would be conducted, and they have set a precedent which thankfully continues to this day, and particularly like two precedents. First one, that they have a fair trial, and that an international organisation can be formed to try people in particular circumstances in a proper courtroom background. And the other precedent was that it said that people, no matter who they were, no matter what they did, they could not hide behind the fact that they were working for a state. Like a general could not claim that I was just a tool of the state, I was only obeying orders. The Nuremberg trial set the precedent that you are responsible for your own actions. The state is not responsible for you. And that continues to this day, thankfully.
Right. So what was the basis of proving their guilt? I heard that video materials that were presented to the defendants at the time and in the courtrooms were considered proof, and that the Nazi perpetrators were simply shocked by the very existence of those evidences.
Well, it was a meticulously worked out case. The prosecutors produced film footage of the concentration camps. They produced thousands upon thousands of documents showing that these people were involved step by step in, well, of course, the Holocaust being the most heinous crime that was being addressed at Nuremberg, but of course other crimes as well. And the world benefited tremendously by the fact that it was so meticulous, that it was so organised, that it was they went through it step by step. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't a show trial, it wasn't rigged in any way. Of course, there was an element of hypocrisy within this trial because, take for example the Soviet Union committed crimes as well during the Second World War.
course.
So there's always going to be that element. But it set a precedent to the world, and it showed the world that people who commit the most terrible crimes can face justice, and the world is better for that.
Mm-hmm. So their own Nazi propaganda was proved to be a tool against itself, right? Against the Nazi state. So fast forward to the 90s now. The International Criminal Court was established in 1998 following a Treaty of Rome, and this court was set to end impunity and to the most serious international crimes, and also it was set to complement the court as a court of last resort. So let's hear about the general idea behind.
The issue of accountability, that when you commit these crimes, no matter how long it takes, you will be held to account for the commission of those crimes.
So looking at the past international tribunals, treating cases such as Rwanda or the former Yugoslavia, for that matter, what lessons do you think are most relevant to present, to dealing with Russia?
Well, I think one lesson which I hope does apply is that no matter how much time passes, justice will be served. Like when it came to Yugoslavia, there was quite a gap between the crimes committed during the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s and people being sent to jail. And it is quite possible that these people thought they had got away with it, they were scot-free, and they could live their lives in comfortable peace and quiet. But that was not the case with some of them. So I think the idea of one of the reasons for starting the ICC is that people who commit crimes against humanity, commit grievous crimes, they will always be looking over their shoulder because there is no statute of limitations on this, I hope. And maybe that will also possibly rein people in if they think about doing something horrible. They will think twice because they will think, I could be tried at some point, not now, maybe not next year, maybe not 5 years, but maybe perhaps even 10 years, and therefore I won't commit this act or I won't order this act. So there are certain lessons which can be learned.
Exactly, even though it doesn't seem to be working in Russia for the time being, with countless crimes committed by Russia, be it in Bucha, direct killing of civilians, to, as I mentioned before, to the deportation of children, right? We are witnessing those war crimes every single day. And that the question looms, right? Whether Russia will be held accountable and whether it is possible to trial Moscow. So let's have a listen of Estonian foreign minister who is simply convinced that Russia has to respond to it.
We need that Russia loses the war, and we have a second Nuremberg trial over Putin, and this is a secure element, basis of security to Europe.
Right, basis of security for Europe. We hear those voices, the need of holding Kremlin responsible. But do you think that is simply feasible and realistic?
At the moment, it is more like wishful thinking, because no matter what goes on in Ukraine, no matter what crimes are committed, the chances of senior Russian figures, be it political or military, facing justice is actually quite remote at the moment. You have a number of reasons for that. For example, at the moment, like if you're a head of state, if you're a foreign minister, you have immunity from prosecution. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to face justice while you're still in power, and Mr. Putin seems to be determined to stay in power for as long as possible. And actually that's a motivation for him to stay in power, of course, because otherwise once he's out of office, then he could face prosecution. So we have that problem. You also have the inability to arrest, like the ICC can issue arrest warrants, which it has done, but it has no police force, it has no sort of long arm of the law that can reach out and grab these people and haul them off to a detention cell.
It only relies on the member states' executive. Right?
And it relies on the sort of goodwill of the member states. And you have the other issue that there's no trial in absentia. for the ICC doesn't agree with that, so you have to wait for these defendants to appear in court, and that, as I said, that could take a long time, or it won't even happen at all. And then, of course, another problem with the ICC as well is that it is subject to the flow of political current at the moment. So, for example, Donald Trump is very much opposed to the ICC, and this can influence their work. It could influence their funding. If their funding is cut, then the chances of them pursuing successful prosecutions against Russians is diminished. And I think the ICC, their workload is huge anyway, but since 2002, when they started functioning, I think they've only prosecuted 13 people, and which isn't very much, and actually that just fuels the resentment against the ICC by Trump saying, look, they're ineffective, they're not working, so why should we place any faith in them, or why should we give them any credence?
Absolutely. So just as you said, justice is one thing and politics is another. And as we know, international justice is slow and unfortunately often dependent on political will. 4 years ago, when the war started, I think there was a large consensus about the accountability of the aggressor, which is Russia, right? And today, Russia, even if it should face justice for its crimes, well, in light of the incoming deal, for instance, forged by the United States, although we still have not heard the specifics, but as we know, it was forged with Russian input. Well, the demand for justice appears to be quietly dropped from the agenda, isn't it?
I would imagine that, particularly for the Trump administration, justice is an unwelcome guest. You prefer it to get out of the room because it will just complicate things. Of course, for Ukraine, it's a fundamental factor that they have to pursue justice. And of course, Ukraine has its own numerous investigations into crimes against humanity, war crimes, you name it. Ukraine is investigating it. And actually, Ukraine is facing the same problem. There are just so many of them. For Ukraine to fight their way through all these cases, interview everybody, document everything, is going to take them a long time and devour an awful lot of their resources. But yeah, justice, as I said, for many people, I would imagine, is an unwelcome guest. It just complicates things. They don't want it, and they prefer to get it away. Maybe in many years to come, when perhaps there is a sort of peaceful resolution to the Ukraine-Russia war, people could go back to it. But for the time being, no, because it's not going to happen. Putin is not going to say, "Oh yes, I shall resign and therefore expose myself to the possibility of being arrested and sent to the ICC for trial." He's not going to do that.
Criminal accountability is one thing, but also some say that compensations will be required from Moscow. This is a very long goal and distant proposal, I think, which is practically unattainable at the moment, especially that, as you've noticed, Trump's administration has already withdrawn from key investigative bodies, and it has softened its language on Russia. So in many respects, it's showing a very, very deep tolerance towards Kremlin. But let us have a listen of Karim Khan, ICC prosecutor. Why is it so important to pursue justice?
If we don't, at this moment in world affairs, cling to the law, if we don't look at ourselves and decide how we can do better, not just in Ukraine, but as nations, as member states of the United Nations, we will not only miss an opportunity, but we may not have further opportunities. I think this needs to be a moment where we realize if we don't cling to the law, we may have nothing to cling to in the future.
You're right. We should stop here, right? But how can we comment on that? That this it should be heard, everyone in the world, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, it's interpreted differently in many places.
It should be like the ideals are there for a reason. We have to have ideals. If we don't have ideals, then
principles
are going to be morally lost. But at the same time, there is this. I think there's a cynicism and a skepticism in many parts of the world when it comes to ideals and principles. If you talk to somebody from India or somebody from Africa, their attitude might be slightly different. We can have our ideas of principles, but then if you talk to somebody from India or Africa or go to Vietnam, for example, which suffered tremendously during the Vietnam War, they will say, well, look, that's all very well, but you're being hypocritical. You talk about ideals, but where were your ideals during the Vietnam War? They can talk to, I'm British, lots of people in the world can say, yeah, you're British, you're talking about ideals, but where were your ideals during the colonial period? And we have to be aware that we can be accused of hypocrisy, we can be accused, and that people have a very cynical attitude towards our ideals. But at the same time, these people have to be aware, they must be aware of what's going on in Ukraine. There are crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity are bad, no matter, you can't excuse them, you can't look away from them.
You cannot deny them, especially when you have proof.
It doesn't matter where you come from, or no matter what country you're in, a crime against humanity is a crime against humanity.
Exactly. Karim Khan faced himself criticism over the war in Gaza and accusations to Benjamin Netanyahu for that matter. But as you say, there are evidence which stands for itself.
Yeah.
So to end, Matthew, what would be your prediction and how this scenario evolves? I mean, what is going to happen in a few years from now?
When it comes to prosecuting leading Russians for what's happened in Ukraine, I'm very pessimistic. I don't think it's going to happen unless something dramatic happens in Russia, like there is a revolution or a coup d'état, and the new Russian government...
Which is highly improbable right now.
Improbable. And the new Russian government wants to curry favour with the West and purge itself of an unwelcome past, and a big part of that unwelcome past are people like Putin, and they could just chuck them in the direction of the ICC. That would be... It might happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. So therefore, I don't think justice is going to be served in any significant way. It's quite possible that Ukraine might be able to get their hands on a few minor military figures in Russia who might be captured during an operation. That might bring a sliver of justice. And at the moment, the only way Ukraine's going to get justice is for Ukrainians is a policy of assassination, which seems to be the only effective tool Ukraine has at the moment.
Matthew, thank you so much for your comments today. I think that that was the basis for action for Vladimir Putin, this pessimism that you've presented, and it was an optimistic approach that he took, simply a bet that he took, that the justice will not be served from his point of view. But anyway, let's stay optimistic, even though the history teaches us that, as we see, it's going the wrong way, because at that time of Nazis, right?
Yeah.
The justice was served, and we all were at the same time.
Yeah, the principle was set in 1945, but applying that principle now is really difficult.
Definitely. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for being here.
And thank you for watching News in Depth. This is TVP World. Please stay tuned.